Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. And while I am your host, I was not actually the game master for this one. The GM this time was Howard Warnes. He ran this adventure back in 1996 originally, and then we reran it a couple weeks ago to update it slightly so that it would fit in with some recent changes that were made to our timeline. Speaking of which, if you didn't see our last video, I'll drop a link to it below. But the nutshell version was that Kang the Conqueror went back in time to the first appearance of the Avengers, and he gave future technology to aliens in the hopes that they would destroy the Avengers for him. We also said that thanks to Kang, certain events were happening sooner than they would have normally. So, before Kang interfered, Bruce Banner's cousin, Jennifer Walters, wouldn't become She Hulk until later on, before Bruce went to her for legal advice and there was a shooting. Bruce gave her a blood transfusion as a result, and she became the Savage She Hulk. Then, a while later, she got a handle on it and became the Sensational She Hulk that we all know and love. And that brings us to the prologue. Thanks to Kang the Conqueror, some aliens go to Earth at Christmas time with the intentions of killing the Hulk. And because it is Christmas, he's spending time with family. So when the aliens attack, he's in the car with his cousin. Because of the attack, there's a car crash, and thanks to exposure to Bruce's blood, Jennifer becomes She Hulk. She and her cousin fight the aliens and win. And in the months that follow, the Savage She Hulk has many interesting adventures involving Michael Morbius, psychics, robots, all sorts of stuff. And when the smoke clears, she's no longer savage. She's permanently green, but now she has her wits about her. No sooner than that happens, the 1964 Summer Olympics are held in Tokyo, Japan. At first, everything seems normal, but soon the world's greatest athletes go missing one by one. So several superheroes investigate, one of them being She Hulk. Another superhero who looks into the case of the missing Olympians is a man named Red. He fought the Germans in World War II and even came to blows with the evil dictator of Germany in 1945. During their scuffle, there was a mishap with a duplicator ray, and now there are tons of Reds. And one of them is here in Japan too, looking into these recent disappearances. While looking around the facilities, Red runs into She Hulk in the kitchen, and she's basically doing the exact same thing. By the way, as a brief aside, we've talked about the Reds quite a bit on this channel, and they all have an advantage on their character sheet called the Valentino effect, which simply put means that girls like them. As for She Hulk, it's been extremely well documented in the comics over the years that for whatever reason, the changes that she has gone through have left her with a very overactive interest in men. So when she meets Big Red, it's love at first sight. In fact, her reaction to him is rather gratuitous. She pins him to the wall and starts kissing him. He overpowers her, peeling her off of him, saying she didn't even tell him her name. And on her end, up until this point in 1964, she's been worried about killing any potential suitors by accident because of her strength. So when he is strong enough to peel her off of him, she feels like he's an even better match for her. So she tries even harder. When we play the game using GURP Supers, which, by the way, is what Howard used when he ran this in 1996, GURPS has a disadvantage called lecherousness. The way it works is as follows. In GURPS, there are generally 3 levels of positive appearances, and each of those levels corresponds with what you have to roll. So if Red encounters a girl with an average appearance, he doesn't have to roll. But if he encounters a girl with an attractive appearance, he needs to roll under a 15 using 3 6-sided dice. If he fails, he has to chat her up. If he succeeds in his role, then it's just business as usual. And the higher the girl's appearance, the harder those dice rolls get. If she has a beautiful appearance, he needs to roll a 10 or less. And if she has a very beautiful appearance, he needs to roll a 5 or less. And according to GURPS, you can only roll once a day to resist. And suffice it to say, on day one, Red fails his roll. And She-Hulk's more or less in the same boat, so she fails her roll too. And in my humble opinion, this actually becomes the biggest obstacle in the adventure. In other words, instead of tearing themselves away from each other to go fight crime, they spend all their time in a high-class hotel in Tokyo. I should probably also mention that the owners of the hotel did not enjoy having these two powerhouses as guests, as the hotel's furniture and superstructure was not designed to withstand that level of punishment. At any rate, on day two, they roll and again fail their willpower roll. On day three, it's more of the same. Meanwhile, more Olympians are being abducted by a villain known as Sukaru, who is the leader of the Kuro Obaki crime organization. Sukaru wears a black costume with a skull mask and a Dracula-like cape, and he's been active since World War II. Now, in 1964, he has the ability to brainwash athletes and turn them into his bionic minions. So finally, Big Red and Shulky make a willpower saving throw for a change and decide to actually go fight some crime. They work together, hunting for clues, and once they are on Sukaru's trail, he sends his bionic henchmen to kill the heroes. In TSR's old Marvel Superheroes RPG, by the way, She-Hulk has monstrous strength, which means she can lift 100 tons, which in GURPS 3rd edition would be a strength of 10,000. So every time she throws a punch, she rolls 1,001 six-sided dice for the damage. And if she kicks, she rolls 1,003 six-sided dice for damage. So saying these bionic Olympians can't withstand her attacks is an understatement. She also has an amazing body, which in GURPS is a health of 223. So while her offensive abilities are through the roof, every time the cyborgs hit her, they whittle away her 223 hit points. Another thing that makes this hard is each cyborg is one of the missing persons. So killing them isn't an option. Even breaking bones and stuff like that wouldn't be very heroic. So She-Hulk feels like her hands are tied, and eventually the cyborgs knock her out. Big Red, on the other hand, comes from DC Heroes, right? He has a strength of 50 APs in the DC system, which is a max lift of 56 quadrillion, 294 trillion, 995 billion, 342,131,200 pounds. And to calculate his 3rd edition GURP strength, you divide that number by 20. And you get a strength of 2 quadrillion, 814 trillion, 749 billion, 767,106,560. When he rolls dice for damage, he rolls 281 trillion, 474 billion, 976 million, 710,657 D6 damage. And in terms of his 40 APs a body in 3rd edition GURP Supers, that's a health of 2,748,779,069,440, which is also how many hit points he has. And this, by the way, is why most people hate GURPS. And is why, since we have teams like the Justice League and the Avengers in our game, we tend to not use GURPS very much. But I digress. So my long-winded point is that these cyborgs can beat on Big Red for a while, and he just doesn't care. He's also strong enough he can crush their metallic limbs as if they were made out of wet clay. So Big Red beats the cyborgs and takes them to the authorities, along with She Hulk, who wakes up and fails a willpower saving throw again. So she starts in saying, "My hero," and is kissing his neck and stuff while he drives. So now, for the moment, she doesn't want to fight crime, but he does. He tries to figure out where the bad guys are located and can't. And She Hulk, honestly, is a real hindrance at the moment. So finally, we come up with a plan that I'm a little bit embarrassed to even explain. But suffice it to say, you can knock out a character with your fist, or you can inflict knockout damage with a kick or a headbutt. So we got creative. And to satisfy She Hulk and make her sleep for a while, you can probably guess how Big Red managed to hit that. Anyways, we decided this was the enjoyable version of knockout damage, and Red was back on the case. So he pretended to be an Olympic weightlifter, and as we explained in detail earlier, Red can lift a lot of weight. So he started lifting more weight than the human athletes could, and the bad guys saw that, so they used gas on him. Red has sealed systems in DC Heroes, which GURPS calls vacuum support or does not breathe, but you get the idea. He pretended to be knocked out, and the bad guys took him to their headquarters. Meanwhile, She Hulk wakes up, makes a willpower saving throw, and is back on the case, just in time to see Red kidnapped by the bionic Olympians. She had to make another roll to see if she'd rush in and attack them for trying to kidnap her man, or if she would be patient enough to follow them back to their headquarters. And Jen made that roll, so she followed them back to the headquarters. And once there, she started knocking out goons. Big Red quit pretending to be knocked out, and he joined the fight too. The goons were all knocked out, and She Hulk tried to unmask Sukaru, but the villain in the Sukaru costume was basically just the male version of a fembot. So when you took off its mask, underneath were just wires, circuits, etc. The real Sukaru got away to be a reoccurring villain that several Japanese superheroes would have to deal with in the years to come. But for now, the Olympians are safe, and that's what matters. And that brings us to the epilogue. Big Red's Valentino effect wears off after a while. That's how the advantage works. And often in the past, this is when the female character decides that for whatever reason she wants something else and moves on. But She Hulk doesn't leave. She's actually very happy with him. So much so that after a while in our game, they got married. And honestly, they managed to live pretty much happily ever after. She Hulk, years from now, gives birth to a son named Sean Michael Redbridge because Big Red's powers come from a piece of ex kryptonite shrapnel in his body. They're not passed on to offspring, and as such, their son is basically only half Hulk, way stronger than any human being is, but not as strong as his mom. So when he reaches adulthood, Sean joins the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation, where he puts those big green muscles of his to good use. But that's a story for another day. So that was it for this one. I enjoyed it partially because I am a huge fan of the classic sensational She-Hulk comics. In fact, all the way back in the 1980s, I was mowing other people's lawns and earning a little money. And to the best of my knowledge, the very first time I bought a comic book with my own money, it was a She-Hulk comic book. And when Bill and Ted hit it big in 1989, I was super into the idea of characters who would break the fourth wall. So when I saw John Byrne having She-Hulk do that in his run, I became an avid fan. Something I thought was particularly interesting was that there were two She-Hulks in his run, and that's something I never seem to hear anyone acknowledge. The first She-Hulk was the quote unquote real She-Hulk. As it turns out, in the Marvel universe, Marvel Comics exist. So She-Hulk went to Marvel headquarters and gave them permission to tell stories about her. They did. And the second She-Hulk is then the fictional She-Hulk that that version of Marvel used in those stories. So my understanding has always been that when She-Hulk breaks the fourth wall, it's that second She-Hulk doing it, not the first one. So the one in today's game is based on the first one, and as such, she won't be saying things about how she's a character in a role-playing game or anything like that. That has caused some confusion over the years. I think there's an argument to be had too that comics where she breaks the fourth wall, therefore, take place in the fictional Marvel universe that exists within the quote unquote real Marvel universe. Sort of like those science fiction shows where there's a simulation inside of another simulation. The Neverending Story was a bit like that. Deadpool might also be an example of this now that I think about it, where the later Deadpool breaks the fourth wall. He might exist within that same fictional world with the second She Hulk. So for people who hate modern comics, that might be a nice thought because it would mean that a bunch of stuff you don't like isn't continuity then. Anyways, so enough of all that. We thought this was an interesting one. We hope that you did too. If so, as always, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, and be sure to leave us a comment because that really helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm. And we love hearing from you guys. From all of us here at the longest running superhero RPG on Earth, we hope that all of you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.